This is your Real Estate Syndication Show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today, I have a guest on that I know you are going to learn so much from. If you are struggling to take that step to get started in real estate, she's an expert in helping you do just that. Her name is Ashley Kerr. She's the host of the Real Estate Rookie Bigger Pockets podcast. She has a number of degrees in accounting. She's going to tell you about how she got started in accounting but hated it and then transitioned to real estate very quickly, buying her first rental property, but then growing to 130 plus now. So she has a book where she's helping a number of people get started in real estate as well. Author, Real Estate Rookie, 90 Days to Your First Investment. She's done a number of other things, but you're going to hear today how you can gain that confidence. You can build a team. You can make it happen and get started in real estate. Let's talk about that a little bit. I know a Real Estate Rookie, 90 Days to Your First Investment, and you highlight or outline really rapid entry, right? In there, how to do that, how to really get started fast. Let's talk about some of those maybe core principles or strategies that you outline there so the listener knows what to expect, but also to help them today take some action.
Yeah, and that's really the biggest thing is taking action. And there's so much information on the internet, free stuff. You can go to the Bigger Pockets forums, you can read, you can listen to podcasts. The hardest part is actually putting it all together into almost like a path or a trajectory as to like, these are the steps that I need to take in this order. And I think that is the hardest part, is not actually sitting down and writing out a plan as this is how I'm going to buy my first property. And these are the steps that I need to take. So the book is written in kind of an order of what I recommend as to how you can actually get your first deal. Like the first thing is, why do you want to get into real estate? What is your why? What is the reasoning? What are your goals? Like actually choosing a strategy that actually suits you, because you could pick like, short-term rentals, they seem to be making a lot of money. But then you could realize I do not like, messaging with guests when there's a problem, or, going back with all the communication and scheduling the cleaners. Like that is not my thing. I thought real estate investing was passive. Choosing a strategy that really suits what you want to do. You have to figure out like your goals and your why first. And then from there, it goes on to, what's your budget? How, are you getting pre-approved? How are you financing the deal? Finding your market based off of your budget as to what you can afford. So if I'm pre-approved, or maybe I have cash saved of $100,000, I'm not going to be able to choose San Francisco as my market to invest in. It's not enough, not even for a down payment there. Like the book kind of gives you those steps as to like where to start, where to go next throughout your real estate investing journey.
What's the biggest hurdle you see most that keep most from moving forward?
We call them the puzzle pieces. And Tony Robinson and I talk about this a lot for partnerships too, as to, there's usually 4 things you need to get started. And the first one is like confidence. You don't have like this fear of getting started. And I definitely had a fear, and that's why I chose partner. Capital. You need some sort of capital. Even if you're getting a no money down deal, you still need reserves in place, So then the next one is knowledge, experience. Maybe you don't, have, anything about investing and you're just starting out your research. So that's holding you back because you feel like you don't know enough. Then the next one is time. Like you just don't have time to analyze deals, things like that. So those are usually one of those things are the big hurdle. And for me, it was capital. I didn't have a lot of money at the time. And I also was afraid. I was scared that worst case scenario, the roof was going to blow off. The tenants were going to fall down the stairs and sue me the day we closed on the property. So I took on a partner to kind of like ease that. He had a lot of reserves. I also knew he had connections. Like if the roof did fall off, we could call his contractor friend to come and, look at it and assess with it. So it also wasn't as scary doing it by myself at that time.
And almost finding a partner or somebody to almost like a battle buddy, I call it, right? These things don't seem as scary all of a sudden, right? You got somebody else you can bounce these ideas and things off of. A lot of those there, right? The knowledge and experience could be from somebody else. The capital reserves, that could be a partner, right? And just gaining confidence as well through that person. Now, even the time piece, man, that is such a struggle For me, I feel like it's always a struggle, right? Looking at the calendar and man, how am I going to really focus on what's most important, right? What is that next thing that I really need to be dialed in on? And what am I going to cut out that's taking time away from the most important things, right? And so early on like that, what would you say is the really the top thing though that's holding that person back? Is it capital? Is it confidence? Maybe I feel like confidence is such a big deal because these other things you can go find.
Yeah, people get stuck in analysis paralysis where they're not confident in analyzing the deal, or they're not confident it's a good deal. And at some point you can only, learn so much, where the other things you're going to need to learn from that hands-on experience. So you need to actually buy the deal to learn the rest of the stuff that comes along with investing in real estate.
I know now you're managing over 130 what units and maybe a campground or something as well that you have.
No, just the two short-term rentals, but we do have 130 units under management. Yeah.
So speak to some of your systems that you have now that you've grown into and how you're managing some of those. So even the listener can think about, hey, this is kind of where I'm going, or this is what I can foresee, and how quickly or how long they should see implementing something like that.
Yeah. So the investor that I worked for, and then myself, we kind of built out a property management company where we had both of our units, under this company together. And then it started to get too much for me. I was overwhelmed. I was working way more than I wanted to. And he was pretty passive as far as the property management side. I ended up hiring a third-party property management company, and we gave them all of our properties. And that lasted for about 3 years. And it was a horrible experience. It was awful. And so we decided, okay, we need to bring it back in-house again. And I knew like I could not do it the same way I was doing it before, where I was doing everything. I had somebody help me part-time with just entering payables and receivables, but that was it. So this next time around, I really had to figure out what can I outsource. And one of the biggest solutions to that was having virtual assistants. So I hired a virtual assistant who would do all tenant communication. So we set up a Google Voice number. All the tenants would, contact that number for any issues. And so anything that could be done through the property management software on the back end, this VA was doing it.
Maybe speak to a failure or a loss or maybe a very tough decision you had to make where this principle really, helped you, Ken, in a big way.
Well, I think so. I had another consulting firm before I started CEO Experience, and I was helping business owners and business leaders, and God challenged me to. We had our fourth child. He was. We didn't know at the time, but again, God can see more than I can see, and he ended up having some disabilities and some setbacks. But my wife came to me when she was pregnant, and she said, "Hey, you're gone a lot. You're traveling a lot, and I'd like to see you a little bit more." And that's a beautiful, wonderful thing that for your wife to come tell you that. But that was part of the gig, right? Companies didn't come to me. I went to them, right? So I might travel all over the country. Matter of fact, just talking about difficult decisions at times, she came when I had two kids, and she said to me that I really would like for you not to travel on our kids' birthdays. And I asked her why, because we always celebrated the birthdays on the weekends, right? But I was gone a lot. And she said, I just think it's something about being home with the kids on their actual birthdays. Could you do that? So she was asking for 2 days out of 365 days, right? But it's hard to say no when you have somebody that calls you up and says, hey, we want you to come into this company and talk to us, and here's the date, and that's the date that we have. And, for me to say, no, it's my son's birthday or my daughter's birthday. But anyways, I thought about it, and so I thought it was a reasonable request, and she asked me to do it, and so I said, I'll do that. And matter of fact, I believed going the second step. So I went back to her and I said, well, I'll miss 4 days. I said, I'll not only take, the two kids' birthdays off, but I'll take your birthday off, and I'll make sure and take our anniversary off, right? Because I wanted to be I wanted to follow these principles. So anyway, then we had two more children. So anyway, but you know what? So she comes to me when we had our fourth child, and she said, "Hey, I'd like for you to stay home more." So I started thinking about it, and I said, "Well, what would it look like for me to form an organization where I could work with Christian CEOs and business owners, but primarily build retreats or mastermind groups and work with them locally and work with them for a longer period of time rather than just go in and give a rah-rah speech or help a business owner get over a hurdle, but really partner with businesses over a period of time so that they could grow their business." And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, or outside of Washington. And so I asked a few of my business advisors about it, who are good guys, but I said, "Hey, I want to work with just Christian CEOs, Christian business owners." And they said, "Ken, we're not sure that there's enough Christian business owners in Washington D.C. for you to have a business." And I said, "Well, I don't know either, but I said, I guess we'll find out, right?" And so the principal just taking the next step. It was like, well, let me launch this and start talking about it. And I didn't really know a lot of Christian business owners, quite honestly, because I was traveling a lot, right? I wasn't working just in Washington, D.C. So the way my wife and I looked at it is we thought, well, let's treat it like a missionary. If we would be called to the mission field, we'd sell everything and we'd go away for 2 or 3 years. And if we weren't seeing results, we'd probably come back. And so that was the commitment we made in that difficult. We just took the next step. We said, let's start it. Let's let it be known. And then, let's see what happens. And sure enough, as soon as I started it, I told a couple of friends, and about a day later, I got a phone call from a guy that said, "Ken, I've never met you, but I hear you're working with Christian CEOs." And I said, "Yes, I am. I'm getting ready to get started to do that." And he said, "Well, I'm in." And I said, "In what?" And he said, "I'm in whatever you're doing." And I said, "Well, you don't even know what I'm doing." And he said, "Well, you're working with Christian CEOs to help them build their business. Isn't that enough? Or, I figured you'll know what you're doing." And I said, "Well, I do know what I'm doing, but I figured you'd need to know more about it." He said, "That's all I need to know." And I said, "Well, you don't even know how much it costs." And he said, "Doesn't matter how much it costs." He said, "I've been praying for somebody to come forward for the last 20 years to help me with my business who's a Christian. And I haven't found anybody. And when I heard about you yesterday, I knew that God had called you to be." And that's just the beauty. So those are difficult moments. It's not always that easy, of course, but it was an affirmation that, if you just take the next step, God has a way of providing exactly what you need.
As you've done 8 businesses and entrepreneur, you became an entrepreneur, and it really just grown so quickly, it seems. I'd love your take and your thoughts on, because we talk about it often on the show, just balancing those responsibilities as entrepreneur, but even, the focus on such an amazing cause, but also being a family man, or, how do you juggle those things? How do you keep family rhythms in check, and, amongst doing these very important things as well?
I like to believe that, again, I started, I guess, a little over 15 years ago, and I like to believe that I'm a lot better today than I was 15 years ago. But the journey is not over, and you do struggle. One of the things that I also consult with some early stage founders and early startups, and I often try to explain to people that learning the power of saying no, and as entrepreneurs and founders are often very type A. They like to say yes to everything. But what you have to start understanding is that ultimately there's really only one commodity that is finite for each of us, and that's time. And none of us know how much we have. And so what I try to help them understand is that every time you say yes, whether you realize it or not, you're saying no to something else. You really have to go into that eyes wide open, each one of those conversations, whether it is somebody asking you socially, somebody from your family, one of your businesses, impact you're trying to make. I also sit on some nonprofit boards. I've gotten much better over 15 years. I'm not going to say I'm perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but what good does it do you to be successful or wealthy or what have you if your children don't talk to you? You have to find that balance, and it's a daily struggle.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a daily fight, right? It's like it's worth it to put up a fight every day for those relationships we claim we're doing all this for anyway, right?
Once heard a gentleman, his name is Matthew Kelly, and he runs a ministry, a religious ministry, and he said that oftentimes what happens when we start wrestling with moral or ethical, or we start wrestling with our faith or theology, we like to say that the line between good and evil is out there. Like I'm going to point out there, and I'm going to show you the line between good and evil. And he says, no, the line between good and evil is drawn right across each of our hearts. So that mirror conversation about what you're doing and what you're not doing, where you're spending time, where you're not spending time, like that's a very, very personal thing that I think each of us has to take to the Lord.
Yeah, drawn across our heart and right in front of our feet. Right. Yeah. David, you mentioned earlier on, about helping family offices to stay safe. And for those that are listening even now, or even some that, potentially will partner with us, I'd love for you to speak into that. Is that something you still do, by the way?
Yeah. So it's interesting. The security company that I started back in 2010, I was actually invited to the founders table by a former client. My partner, Frank, had been, your listeners probably won't know this, but there is a law enforcement agency tied to the US State Department. It's called Diplomatic Security. And Frank had been in diplomatic security. He had then gone to work for Dell, and actually helped set up the first executive protection program for Michael Dell and his family. Spent several years working directly with Mr. Dell. Then was recruited to come back to the East Coast and become the head of security for a billionaire family and their private hedge fund. And he had been my client. And he reached out to me in 2010, invited me to the founders table of the company Torchstone, which we ultimately started. Still, that's the company that was working at the Rio Games back in 2016. They've done Olympics, a lot of special projects, worked with a lot of family offices. So yes, I'm still very, very tied to that. And have done that work over the years. In terms of your question, what a family office should be thinking about is that what Frank and I used to joke is that security it's not rocket science, but it is a science. And you do want to be talking to someone, a trusted advisor, a strategic advisor, and not necessarily just like the retired chief of police from your small town. Nothing against the chief of police in your small town. I've known a lot of them. They're great individuals. But, if you go to that individual and say, hey, I'm thinking about, a trip to South Africa. If that chief of police doesn't have a passport and has never been out of the country, might not be the person that you want to talk about, that safari trip, that business trip to South Africa, and then you're going to do a safari in the southern part of the continent, might not have a lot to add to that conversation. So again, it's not rocket science, but it is a science. And ask hard questions. If you have an advisor, you should be able to ask really hard questions, and they should be able to explain it to you without jargon and without a lot of confusion in a way that makes logical sense. And that's what I always tried to do.
I truly believe real estate, everybody can find success there to design the life that they want. In the last 6 years, I've been able to help hundreds of students get started in real estate doing what we do. And I come from this simple belief, if I can do that, so can they. So thank you for having me on this show, Whitney. It's really a privilege.
Yeah, no, honored to meet you and your bride and to get to learn more about your all's path to really success. And when I say freedom, not just really financial freedom, but the freedom that you were seeking, right, for your marriage and your children, and those things that I would say are most important, right? Everybody claims they're doing these things, but most are not living that way. Anyway, there's been so much time at work that they can't, honor really those relationships that we claim we're doing it all for. And so I loved what you said. It's like you came home, you're frustrated, middle of the night, you wake her up, and even she says, hey, our marriage is suffering even because of this job. And it makes me think about smack in the face. Maybe you realize that, hey, I can't afford not to do something. I can't afford not to quit, this and do something else. right? Is that kind of where you all were at that time?
Yeah, just not knowing what options we had available. Like I said, I grew up, that was what I was taught from a very early age: go find a good, stable job. And getting frustrated in that good, stable job that I thought I'd be able to do for the rest of my life kind of threw a wrench in everything in my future. On top of that, I've experienced multiple injuries too at UPS, where it's a very physical, labor intensive position. And that can put a financial stress, that can put an emotional stress on relationships as well. And the amount of sacrifice that I was willing to give my body for a paycheck was huge, not realizing the effects of it in the future.
When in that process did you actually quit? Like actually leave? Was it, I mean, pretty quickly after you're talking about when you got home that night, or was it like, no?
4 years.
So you stayed 4 more years
Yeah.
while you're trying to start those other businesses at the same time? Oh my goodness. That's madness, right? Right. I mean, it's chaos in the moment, no doubt, trying to do all that. Speak to your and Jasmine's transition then to getting some of your first deals and how you all were doing that while still working and managing some of those things while still trying to be the husband and father you want to be. And I mean, I did a very similar thing, and it's chaos to say the least. But how did you manage that? How were you all unified in that and getting to the first few deals?
Thinking back, it was like really controlled chaos. We got to get into sync with each other and really identifying what our strengths are and what our weaknesses are. So I like Dan Sullivan's book, Who Not How, right? Finding the right who for it. So I don't have to be good at everything. I'm looking to be an expert in one thing. Because a jack of all trades is a master of none. At least that's what I believe in. So me and Jazz really sat down and game planned for a future. She likes to say, if you fail to prepare, you're preparing to fail. So we were preparing for the exit, and we realistically knew it will take time. And in that time frame, we're going to make sacrifices. See, I think a lot of people struggle with the fact that they think it's just going to happen. No, you have to be willing to choose into hard work temporarily to have that financial freedom abundantly. So we really game planned around our lanes. And I realized that I'm really good at networking, creating relationships, finding deals, funding deals. And she's really good on the back end, the logistics, the stabilization is what we call it, where you keep the money. It's not just how much you make, it's how much you keep, and the legalities and contracts and all the stuff that makes me go, oh, I'm tired. I don't want to talk about that. So we separated our lanes. However, our work schedules were completely different night and day. So as a UPS driver, I had a later start time. And for those that don't know on your podcast, my wife was a mail carrier. So we were in very similar professions, but her start time was like 3 or 4 hours before me. So we already had a staggered schedule. We found ways to maximize where, okay, when she's free, what can I do to support her so she can get her things done, and vice versa. And we got creative. Being that we were on the road, we leveraged a lot of technology, phones and Zoom calls, and be able to listen to podcasts like yours to get information and updates on markets and trends and so forth. But really, networking with people got us confident enough to pick a market to get started in a deal. And it's all about the numbers. I mean, you know that, Whitney, and for your listeners out there, if you just simplify it to what is my strategy and goal and do the numbers support it, it really takes away all the fog of all the different strategies out there. So back to our story, my goal was to replace my income. We felt the best way to do that was to create passive income through cash flow. That eliminated a lot of strategies and then isolated to a few. And we identified the one we thought we could do best, which is buy and hold and create our own portfolio as active, passive investors.
Evangelize yourself every day, and you don't have to evangelize anyone else, because you'll be so full of belief and faith that people will want what you have. And it's that idea of like literally teaching myself, even as I'm talking to you, I'm reminding myself of belief.
It's a relationship, right? I mean, with the Lord, you didn't fall in love with your wife, at least as much as you love her now on the first day, right? But it's the time and the constant time together. Speak to, you talked about evangelizing yourself every day. I love that thought. What does that look like? And I'm going way off my outline here, just so the listeners know, but I love this thought. I think it's probably one of the most important things we could talk about right now. But how do you do that on a, just everyday basis? Because I agree, it's an everyday thing. And what does that look like?
Yeah. So for me, it's identity. You have to know who you are first. I always ask people, are you a sinner or a son? Pick one. And well, I'm a sinner saved by grace. I'm like, no, wait, who does God see you to be? Well, son. Okay. Are you a son? So what happened with me is I realized the cross and the importance of the cross and the full importance of the cross. I've been crucified. It's no longer I who live, it's Christ who lives in me. Therefore, I've been living in the tomb. The tomb is the resurrection. The open tomb is the resurrection. So I'm a new man. Okay. So I had to say that already, because if you try to evangelize yourself and you view yourself constantly as a sinner, it's really hard. But if you know you are a son, if you know your identity of who you really are, so what I do every morning is I do a call up exercise. And the way I do it is I call myself up, not out. I have a tendency historically to call myself out. And so calling myself up, it looks like some days, it depends on the day, but it's like, hey, Jeremy, come on, man. You got this. You're a liberator. Remember, you're a freedom fighter. Remember, you were designed, you were chosen to activate sons and daughters. Remember, you are and I tell myself who I am. Some mornings it's like, Lord, who do you see that I am this morning? I need you to tell me, remind me who I am. And then that usually leads me to tell God who he is. So that act of calling myself up, and it can be as spiritual as like, I'm reading scripture over myself, or I'm reminding myself, but it's this idea that my default sometimes goes back to human, and I want to be supernatural. I want to be a son. So therefore I have to remind myself of my identity. I had to call myself into it. I have power and authority. I have been, all sin has been taken from me. I don't have a sin nature anymore. I have a sin habit, but the cross has taken the sin nature. Death and sin don't own me anymore. I'm just wooing myself into who I am to start my morning. So that's what I do in the morning. And then in the afternoon at 5:30, I do something called an examine. And it's really simple. I do three things. What was I grateful for? What was really, really good about today? Whoever I'm with, my wife usually will talk about it. And then second, it's where was I not at peace today? Where was I off? And was it me or was it them? And it usually is me. And I'm like, man, what's my tendency here? Why do I have a tendency? Yep, I have a tendency to be defensive or to worry or whatever it is. Why is that happening? And I solve it usually with the Holy Spirit. But what I'm doing is I'm examining my day so that I keep short accounts and nothing carries on to the next day. So it's a rhythm of identity, and it's a rhythm of stepping into who you are called to be and who you really are, so that you walk with power and you bring peace everywhere you go.
You need to understand the end state to develop a strategy on day one, right? Where do I want to get and where do I want my lender to get, right? Ultimately, it's about human dynamics, right? We're all humans. We're not dealing with computers. We dealt with computers and modeled scenarios. A lot of these loans haven't gotten made because there's even interaction and tweaking around the edges. A lot of these loans did get made, and at the same time, it's like, what got you in it, it's going to have to get you out of it. So let's take a lending shop, right? Who is the ultimate decision maker? That's question number one. Who is the ultimate decision maker? How close are you to that? Now, I'm not saying call him. Never call the ultimate decision maker on day number one, because he doesn't have time to listen to all your rigmarole and all that stuff. He's got to know who he is, or generally what he is, he or she, or their motivation, right? It could be the CEO of a public company that doesn't want to go on to the next call with investors and talk about how his delinquency rate is up, or talk about the write-downs that they've taken. And it could be someone who's more aggressive about that, right? It could be a warehouse lender that's not even in touch day to day with the guy who's in touch with you. It could be a bondholder that will tomorrow no longer be here, depending on what happens. It could be a servicer that has zero incentive for anything other than to collect fees, and at the same time to do what's best for them and best for the trust. It's not that they only do what's best for them. No, they do what's best for them. It's best for the trust, right? They will not sacrifice themselves for the trust, but they typically will not sacrifice the trust that holds the loan for themselves. Everything has to make sense and fit a pattern and fit the rules that are there. So the question is, who's the ultimate decision maker? How are you going to get the individual you're talking to convince the ultimate decision maker of what it is that you want them to convince them of? Okay, so let's go with the CEO that doesn't want to tell his shareholders what this. How are you going to get your guy, the guy you're talking to, the guy you're negotiating with, the asset manager, to call his boss and say, hey, Joe, we need to take a 40% loss on this loan. I mean, we got to write this thing down. I don't know what you know, but back in the day, there were times when you sent an emissary to the enemy and they came back in a bag. You really want to bring the bad news, right? And you need to know whether that bad news is something that your guy wants to bring. And if it isn't, how are you going to convince him that bad news is actually the best news he could bring, right? To say first loss is the best loss. There's a lot of different adages, but how do you translate that into the message you're giving to your guy? And how do you equip him to bring that message over to his boss to be able to close that deal? And the answer is, it's not in a simple conversation. It's not like, oh, I told him, hey, speak, we'll see. And I told him all the stuff. And I said, I'm good at the money. I'm going to get a better job. It's about how are you painting the end state picture to him? How are you painting the fact that this is the best situation they will find? How are you proving it to them beyond a shadow of that? Obviously, you can't prove it. But how are you convincing them of that? Okay. That's not a tough guy negotiation stance. That's a technical conversation. You need to prove those points. Okay. How are you proving all that and giving it to him in a package that is digestible? I'm not talking about package as in like a write-up, but how are you packaging this to him, giving it to him, which by the way is best done in a write-up, but that's besides the point, that he could then use that to convince his superiors, to convince his decision makers. So go up the chain of command. Never forsake the guy that seems to be at the bottom of the totem pole that really can't do anything for you, because he does get a seat at the water cooler. At a minimum, he's actually running your loan. And then there's somebody else coming on board. Unless you did something to tick off someone above him, if you could use this messaging and control the narrative and control their internal evaluation, that's the key thing. Control their internal evaluation to the maximum extent possible, then you have a chance to succeed. What I mean by that is, if a lender thinks something's worth $100 and you think it's worth $50, the chance of you guys reaching a deal while sticking to your guns is very, very low. But if you could somehow find a way to get them to believe your valuation, and it's not by saying nice, kind words to them, it's about proving out assumption by assumption by assumption, and proving out the model, and then showing why you value. Because you could tell them, hey, it's worth $50, and they go, yeah, we know. Dude, you're not going to be the one that's going to turn it around because you brought it to $50, right? If you can take those pieces together and sell it as a package and turn that around, then is what to talk about. Whether the lender is a bank, whether the lender is a CMBS trust, whether the lender is Fannie or Freddie, which is a lot more difficult, you're not assured of success if you take this approach. But you're assured of failure if you don't take this approach, or if you don't get lucky, like a dead clock being right twice a day, that the other side is going to come to the same conclusion as you, and also at the same time believe that you could be the one turning it around.